The airport was busy that afternoon, full of noise and movement. Rolling suitcases clicked against the shiny floor, announcements echoed through the speakers, and people rushed past with the look of someone who didn't want to miss their flight. Families hugged goodbye, friends laughed over coffee, and tired travelers tried to find a seat to rest. In the middle of all this, near Gate 14, sat a little girl in a wheelchair. She had a small pink suitcase beside her, the kind you could carry onto the plane. Her hair was tied back neatly, but her clothes looked slightly rumpled, like she had been traveling for hours. She wasn't crying, but her eyes kept moving, scanning the crowd, as though she was looking for someone she knew. A few seats away, a man was waiting with his young daughter. They had just come from visiting relatives and were heading home. His daughter was busy flipping through a small picture book, but every now and then, she would glance over at the girl in the wheelchair. Something about the way the girl sat, so still, so quiet, made her stand out in the sea of movement around her. The man noticed it too. At first, he thought maybe her family had just stepped away for a moment, maybe to grab some food or check the boarding gate. But as the minutes passed, no one came back to her. People walked past without paying much attention. Some were in a hurry, some were on their phones, and a few gave the girl a quick glance before moving on. The man began to feel uneasy. Airports weren't the kind of place you left a child alone, especially one who might need extra help. He tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe her parent was just at the counter checking on the flight. Maybe she had an older sibling nearby. But 20 minutes went by, and the girl was still there, sitting quietly, holding onto the handle of her suitcase, as if it was the only thing keeping her company. His daughter leaned closer to him and whispered, "Dad, why is she sitting there alone?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should even ask. He glanced at the girl again. She was now fiddling with the zipper on her bag, looking down at her lap. "I'm not sure," he answered quietly. But inside he was starting to feel something, a mix of worry and curiosity. Airports can be overwhelming for anyone, but for a child, especially one traveling with limited mobility, they could be intimidating. The thought of being left alone there made his chest tighten. He watched for another 10 minutes, telling himself that someone would show up soon. But nobody did. The girl didn't seem panicked, but there was a certain sadness in the way she kept looking toward the main walkway, as if expecting someone to appear from the crowd. Finally, the man decided he couldn't just sit there and wonder. He stood up, telling his daughter to wait where she was, and walked slowly toward the girl. He didn't want to startle her, so he approached from the front, bending down a little, so they were at eye level. "Hey there," he said gently, offering a kind smile. "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl hesitated, her eyes studying his face for a moment before she nodded. "My dad," she replied softly. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. "Is he nearby?" the man asked. "He said he had a meeting," she answered, glancing toward the busy terminal. The man frowned slightly, though he tried to keep his expression warm. "How long ago did he leave?" She shrugged, looking down at her lap again. "A while ago." There was a small pause. The man noticed the girl's suitcase looked barely packed, as if it had just enough for a short trip. Her phone was on the seat next to her, but she didn't seem to be using it. "Where's the rest of your family?" he asked, keeping his voice calm and friendly. "It's just him and me," she said after a moment. Something about the way she said it made the man's heart sink. There was no complaint in her tone, no anger, just a simple statement, as if she had accepted it a long time ago. For a few seconds, he didn't know what to say. He didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable, but he also couldn't ignore the situation. Leaving a child alone in a public place, no matter the reason, felt wrong. He decided to stay with her for a little while. He sat down in the empty seat next to hers, leaving enough space so she wouldn't feel crowded. "What's your name?" he asked. She told him, her voice just above a whisper. He introduced himself too, then pointed to his daughter, who was still sitting with their bags a few seats away, giving a little wave. The girl smiled faintly at the sight. They began to chat, nothing too personal, just small talk about where she had traveled from and if she liked the city. She answered politely, but he could sense a quiet loneliness in her words. Every so often he glanced around, scanning the terminal for anyone who might be looking for her. But the only people moving past were other travelers, none of whom paid any attention to the little girl in the wheelchair. The man knew he couldn't leave her there. Even if her father was just a few gates away, someone needed to make sure she was safe. And as he sat there talking to her, he began to realize that maybe the real story wasn't just about where her dad was. It was about why she was here alone in the first place. The minutes ticked by slowly. The man stayed beside the girl, making light conversation, but his mind kept drifting back to the same thought. Why would a father leave his daughter alone like this? The airport was as busy as ever. Every now and then, an announcement echoed through the speakers about delayed flights or gate changes. People hurried by with coffee cups in their hands, pulling heavy luggage behind them. It seemed like the whole world was in a rush, except for this little girl, sitting quietly in the middle of it all. His daughter eventually came over, curiosity written all over her face. She leaned close to him and asked in a low voice, "Dad, is she okay?" "She's waiting for her father," he explained softly. The two girls exchanged shy smiles. His daughter, always the friendly type, crouched a little so she could talk to her directly. "Do you like drawing?" she asked, noticing the small notebook in the girl's lap. The girl nodded. "Sometimes. I draw animals." "Can I see?" Slowly, the girl opened the notebook. Inside were neat pencil sketches, dogs, cats, even a bird perched on a tree branch. They weren't messy doodles, they were careful and detailed, showing patience and focus. "They're amazing," his daughter said sincerely. A small smile tugged at the girl's lips. It was the first real sign of warmth he had seen on her face since sitting down. But as they spoke, he kept glancing toward the main walkway, expecting to see a man approach, maybe with an apology for taking so long. Still, no one came. Something about it didn't sit right with him. He thought about his own child. The idea of leaving her alone in a crowded airport, even for 5 minutes, was impossible to imagine. What if she needed help? What if she got lost? What if someone with bad intentions approached? The risks were endless. He gently asked the girl, "When did your dad say he'd be back?" She paused, thinking. "He didn't say. He just told me to wait here." And that was... Her brow furrowed as she tried to remember. Before the last flight left. That was at least an hour ago. He looked over at his daughter, who was now chatting happily with the girl about favorite animals. He could tell she was starting to grow attached in that innocent way children do when they find someone they like. He leaned back in his seat, watching the two of them talk. A part of him hoped he was wrong, that maybe in just a few minutes, her father would walk up with an embarrassed smile and say there was some kind of mix-up. But another part of him couldn't ignore the possibility that this was more than just bad timing. For now, he decided to wait a little longer, but this time, he'd stay close. If her father didn't return soon, he knew he would have to step in and do something. He wasn't the kind of man to just look the other way. And deep down, he felt that maybe this chance meeting wasn't an accident at all. He shifted slightly in his seat, leaning forward so he could talk to the girl without making her feel uncomfortable. The other passengers around them were in their own worlds, scrolling on phones, sipping coffee, or checking departure screens. Nobody seemed to notice the small, quiet moment unfolding near Gate 14. He asked her softly, "So, where are you and your dad traveling to?" She looked at the floor for a moment before answering. "Home, I think. He said we were flying back today." "You think?" he asked gently, curious about the uncertainty in her voice. She gave a little shrug. "Sometimes plans change. He says that a lot." The way she spoke, it wasn't the way most children her age talked. There was no excitement about going home, no sparkle in her eyes when she mentioned her father. Instead, it was matter-of-fact, like she had learned not to expect much. "Have you been traveling for long?" he continued, keeping his tone light. "A few days," she said. "We were at a hotel, because he had work meetings. I stayed in the room most of the time." His daughter, who was sitting on the floor beside the wheelchair now, looked up. "That sounds boring," she said honestly. The girl gave a tiny laugh. "It's okay. I draw." They went back to flipping through the sketchbook, but he stayed focused on her earlier words. She stayed in the room most of the time? Alone? In a hotel? The thought made him uneasy. Do you have anyone else you could call? He asked carefully. A friend or family member? She shook her head. No, it's just him and me. Always been that way? Since I can remember, she replied. Her tone wasn't sad, just resigned. Something stirred in his chest. He had been raised to believe that being a parent meant being present, not just physically, but emotionally. This girl didn't seem to have that. He decided to ask the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind. Do you know where he is right now? She hesitated, then said. He said he had to meet some people for work. He told me to wait here, and that someone from the airport would help me if I needed anything. Did anyone come to check on you? She shook her head. No. That was it. His unease turned into something stronger, a quiet determination. Leaving a child, especially one who might need extra help, alone in a crowded airport for this long wasn't just careless. It was dangerous. He tried to keep his voice calm as he asked one last question. Do you know how long he'll be? No, she said simply. He glanced over at his daughter, who was now telling the girl a funny story about their last vacation, trying to make her laugh. For a moment he just watched them, two kids connecting, sharing something pure and simple. But the longer he sat there, the more certain he became. This wasn't a situation he could just walk away from. Something wasn't right, and he had the sinking feeling that what he was seeing was only the surface of a much bigger story. He leaned back, thinking. If her father didn't come back soon, he was going to have to take the next step, one that might change the course of the day entirely. And that's when he realized maybe it had already begun to change. The sound of rolling suitcases and boarding calls filled the air, but the man's focus was on the small girl sitting beside him. He could see she was trying to stay calm, but there was something in her eyes, a mix of patience and quiet disappointment, that spoke louder than words. He decided it was time to find out more. You said your dad had a meeting? He asked, trying to keep his tone light. She nodded. He always has meetings, even on trips. Sometimes he says they're really important, more important than anything else. More important than spending time with you? His voice was gentle, but the question seemed to make her pause. She looked down at her hands. I guess so. He says it's so we can have a good life. There it was, that familiar phrase many children of busy parents had heard before. But in her voice, it didn't sound like pride. It sounded like an excuse she had been told too many times. He decided to try a different angle. What does your dad do for work? He's the boss of a big company, she said matter-of-factly. Lots of people work for him. He's in charge of everything. It clicked in his mind. Her father wasn't just busy. He was a CEO. That explained the sharp suit he imagined, the constant meetings, the sense of being too important to wait at an airport gate. But it didn't explain why a man with so much responsibility could so easily set aside the most important responsibility of all, his child. He thought for a moment before asking. Did he tell you where you're going after this? Home, she said. Then she hesitated. I think. He could hear the uncertainty again. Do you live far from here? A few hours by plane, she replied. We've been traveling a lot lately. Different cities. Different hotels. Sometimes I don't know which one is home anymore. Her words settled heavily in the air between them. His daughter, still sitting cross-legged beside the wheelchair, looked up at him with wide eyes. Even she seemed to sense there was something unusual about this. He leaned a little closer. And when he left, did he say when he'd be back? No. He just told me to wait. He said I'd be fine because I'm old enough. She paused before adding, I'm 10. 10 years old, sitting in a crowded terminal, left alone for over an hour. He felt a slow, controlled anger rising in his chest. He wasn't an impulsive man, but there were certain things you just didn't do. This was one of them. As they spoke, he noticed a few airport staff walking past, but none of them stopped to check on her. It was clear her father hadn't told anyone to watch her. She was simply there, waiting. Has this happened before? He asked quietly. She gave a small nod. Sometimes at hotels. Sometimes at airports. He says I'm strong and can manage. Strong. That was the word her father had used. But looking at her now, small, polite, carrying herself with quiet composure, he knew strength wasn't something she should have to rely on at this age. What she needed was someone to care enough to stay. He realized then that if he didn't step in, no one would. And as he glanced at his daughter, he knew she was watching him closely, learning from what he chose to do next. He gave the girl a reassuring smile. "Well, you don't have to wait alone anymore. I'll stay with you until he comes back." She didn't say thank you right away, but there was a small shift in her posture, as if some of the weight she'd been carrying had just been lifted. And that's when he knew, whether her father appreciated it or not, this moment mattered. The girl didn't speak much after that, but her quiet smile said more than words. She kept flipping through her sketchbook while his daughter sat beside her, pointing out her favorite drawings. He checked the time again. More than an hour and a half had passed since he first noticed her sitting alone. The father still hadn't appeared. That was it. He wasn't going to wait any longer. He leaned toward the girl. "I'm going to find someone from the airport to help us. Okay? I'll stay close. You and my daughter will be fine here." She nodded, almost like she was used to other people stepping in when her father wasn't around. That thought alone made him clench his jaw. He walked toward a nearby information desk where an airport staff member stood, answering questions for passengers. When he explained that a young child in a wheelchair had been left alone for almost 2 hours with no sign of her parent, the staff member's face shifted from polite patience to concern. "Where is she now?" the staff member asked quickly. "Right over there," he said, pointing to the two girls. "She told me her dad's at some meeting in the airport, but no one has checked on her this entire time." The staff member immediately picked up the phone, speaking in low, urgent tones. Within minutes, 2 security officers arrived. They didn't storm in or cause a scene. They approached gently, kneeling down to speak to the girl, asking her a few questions to confirm her identity. His daughter looked at him, eyes wide, but he gave her a small nod to show that everything was okay. The girl answered the officers calmly, almost too calmly, as if she'd been through something like this before. One of the officers spoke into his radio. "We've located the minor. Stand by for parent contact." The man stayed beside her, offering a reassuring presence while the officers did their job. He wasn't trying to take her father's place. He just wanted to make sure she wasn't left alone again, even for a second. It wasn't long before one of the officers' radios crackled with a reply. They had located her father. He was in the VIP lounge. The man felt a mix of relief and frustration. The VIP lounge was less than a 5-minute walk from Gate 14. All this time, her father had been sitting in comfort, drinking coffee, probably scrolling through emails, while his daughter waited alone in a crowded terminal. Within minutes, the father appeared, led by another officer. He was dressed in a sharp suit, holding a leather briefcase. His expression wasn't one of worry. It was annoyance, like he had been interrupted. The man stood there, feeling a wave of disbelief. "Sir, your daughter has been alone for almost 2 hours," one of the officers said firmly. The father brushed it off with a quick wave of his hand. "She's fine. I told her to wait here. She knows how to handle herself." That was when the man stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene, but his words cut through the noise of the terminal. "Do you have any idea what could have happened to her?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with quiet conviction. The father's eyes flicked toward him, and for the first time, he seemed at a loss for words. The man didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. The truth was already hanging in the air, impossible to ignore. The father didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted between the man, the officers, and his daughter. She sat quietly in her wheelchair, her hands resting in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pouting. But there was a heaviness in her silence that made the man's chest ache. One of the officers broke the pause. "Sir, for the safety of minors, we strongly advise you not to leave your child unattended in the terminal again. You need to remain with her until boarding." The father gave a stiff nod, as if the warning was nothing more than an inconvenience. He stepped toward his daughter and said, "Come on, let's go. We're boarding soon." She didn't move right away. Her eyes lifted briefly to meet his, and in that moment, the man could see it, the quiet disappointment, the longing for something more than just a ride to the next city. The father reached for the handle of her wheelchair, but before he could turn away, the man crouched down beside her. "Hey," he said softly, "you take care of yourself, all right?" For the first time since they'd met, she smiled, small but real. "Thank you for sitting with me," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. He nodded. "Anytime." His daughter stepped forward, giving the girl a quick hug. "I hope we see you again," she said. The father cleared his throat, clearly eager to leave, but he didn't say anything to the man. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe he didn't want to admit that a stranger had stepped in where he should have been. As they left, the man watched them disappear into the boarding line. His daughter slipped her hand into his, and for a few moments they just stood there in the noise and movement of the airport, neither saying a word. Later, as they walked toward their own gate, his daughter finally spoke. "Dad." "Yeah. I don't get it. Why would someone leave their kid alone like that?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes people get their priorities wrong. But that's why it's important to notice when someone needs help and to do something about it." She nodded slowly, as if filing that thought away in her mind. They boarded their flight, but the image of the little girl stayed with him. He didn't know if her father would change after today. He didn't know if she would ever be in a situation like that again. But he knew that for those couple of hours, she hadn't been alone. Someone had been there, listening, caring, and making sure she was safe. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to remind her that there were people in the world who would stand by her, without asking for anything in return. For him, it was a simple decision. But for her, it might have been the moment that changed everything.